I am delighted to move on to our next keynote speech now, and very pleased that we have with us Lord Johnston of Lainston, the Minister for Investment at the new Department for Business and Trade. Lord Johnston knows our industry very well and is known to the industry, having spent 25 years in financial services, both in Asia at dot-com startups, and was the board chair, the non-exec chair at DIT beforehand. He has been an energetic and forceful advocate for Britain and for our industry. He would be happy to take a few questions after his remarks, so please do welcome Lord Johnston to the stage. Thank you.
Thanks very much. If nothing else, is it working now, the microphone? Thank you very much to the person who pinned it on me. What a fabulous event this is. And I've been much enjoying this morning reading the report on how to make the UK more investable, which I think is a fabulously well-written report. I don't know if anyone here wrote the report. Hands up if you helped write the report, or are they having a well-deserved rest? Well, thank you very much. And also thank you to Freshfields for working with the City UK. It has the valuable quality of being very short, which in government is helpful. And it contains many useful points. And I'd like to really spend as much time as I can answering your questions, talking about those points, particularly when we come after a panel of such experts. But I thought I might tell you a little about what I'm trying to do, so then you can have a thought about how you can help me do my job better. And like you, I was in financial services. I ran fund management businesses for most of my life and was involved in global emerging markets. Is anyone here involved in global emerging markets? Hands up if you are. Sensible. There's one poor person crouched behind the pillar over there. There are a few over here. Again, they like to keep to the fringes of the room. You're at the front. Well, emerging markets are hard work, aren't they? They're hard work. They've been difficult really for 30 years since I went into them. Now that I've left them, they look a bit more attractive. I don't know if it's something to do with me, but emerging markets, they're always changing leader. There's always a political crisis. So I left emerging markets and went into British politics. And all I can say is stay where you are. Stay where you are. Far more valuable in my view, is it to be a business person in financial services, to be, and I say this very seriously. I say this at the beginning of all my speeches so you can hear it, that there is no more noble endeavour for a human being, an individual, than to allocate capital to the highest point of return. And when I say that, the room always goes deathly silent, because we're sort of brought up to believe somehow that capitalism has failed, that it sort of doesn't work, that it hasn't delivered. But actually we know that everything that we have, most things that we have in terms of the comforts, literally the products and services that give us longer, happier lives, come from that wonderful process where capital is allocated to the place of highest possible return. And that's why I always say thank you very much to those of you who engage in this noble cause. And it's my job to make sure, as a government minister and the government in general, that we celebrate business success and we cherish business people, and particularly in the financial services sector, which is such a core concept of this country, and such a powerful driver of our economy, but also for the force of human good. And I mean that sincerely. And I don't think we can give that message out quite enough, but I want you to hear that today. So I've got three key criteria in my life. One's transactional, one's tactical, and one's strategic. And the transactional point is, I hope, relevant to all of you. I don't know if we have any funds here, or let's say investment bankers. Are there any investment bankers in the room? Let's see anyone's investment banker. You're probably like politicians, you're too embarrassed to admit it. My daughter, when I go and collect her from school, says, "Please, Daddy, don't tell anyone what you do." When I rather sympathise with that. Have we got any fund managers in the room? Any fund managers here? Yeah? Okay, what have we got? We've got lawyers. You got any lawyers in the room? Yeah, any consultants? Consultants, put your hands up. Who have I missed? Any fund service providers? I'm really thinking of the people who deal with clients, because my job, and this is one of the reasons why I decided to go into this job, was because the government needed a salesperson, really. In terms of what the government does, it does many things well, I've discovered, but it does some things less well, because it's not how it's structured, which is really to build proper long-term personal relationships. And there are difficulties around that. There are issues of proprietary, and there's turnover of officials and clearly of politicians and changing priorities. So I wanted to bring my skills, which are pretty straightforward. There really is as a salesperson, to become the chief salesperson of the United Kingdom, and to make sure that every company who comes here, every investment fund who comes to the UK, every pool of capital that directs its attention towards this noble nation, feels that they have a concierge service who can look after them and facilitate their transaction when it comes to bringing FDI into the country. And that's very important. And I want you to know that I'm here for all of you. I'm available from 6 a.m. until midnight. And you can get me on LinkedIn, and you can get me at my department. I'm happy to give you my mobile phone number. And I've given it to everyone I meet, and I ask people to hand it on to people, because that's how I manage to reach out to the business communities to say the government is here to assist you. I am a government minister whose sole function is to make sure that FDI in this country grows, that we're investable, and that you are supported. My officials, who I love very much, some of them are in the room today, they gave me my business card. And I don't know if anyone has a business card here. You probably all have business cards. What does it have on your business card? What's the two things it has on your business card? Yeah, it has your email address and it has your mobile phone number. And mine didn't have my phone number on it. And I was like, that's a bit weird. Well, why hasn't it got my phone number on? They said, because then, Minister, people might try and contact you. And so if you could see, with all good intentions, where that's coming from, you can see how important it is that someone who comes from our sector actually does a job like this to be a conduit to you all. So transactional support is very important. And we have the Office for Investment, which is our elite investment banking unit placed in number 10, but it's split between the Department for Business and Trade and number 10, which gets things done. So know that they're there. And on top of that, well, underneath that to some extent, or alongside it, we have around the world hundreds, I think 850 or so personnel in post to help companies who want to come to the UK. And we have hundreds and hundreds of individuals and personnel in London to support people coming in. And we have a special financial services team. We've got Rupert Daniels here and David Riches, who really are dedicated to making sure that this sector is seen as a core component of our economy. And as I say, you are cherished, celebrated, and supported. So use us. Has anyone actually used the Department for Business and Trade for anything? Ever? 2 people. Thank you very much. But why? It's free. And I don't think there are that many things in the world, not in government, that are free. And so please use this service. It's there, and it's extremely capable and very effective. And I'm ultimately available to you as well. And then there's the tactical work that I have to do, which is to try and get the machine of Whitehall, the machinery of government, to look at everything through the lens of the investor. And this is tactical, this is not strategic, and I come on to that in a minute. And that could be issues such as business mobility, the mobility of people, so working with the government to understand how important it is that your companies want to move people around your firms, and to separate philosophically and ideologically the difference between immigration and business mobility, so that people can feel a sense of release, that it's not a concern or something that needs to be managed. In fact, business mobility is something that we welcome. And if we're to be successful as a nation, in fact, all great nations in the world, an absolute direct line, in my view, except in very rare circumstances, is linked to the ability of intellectual capital to travel to and from those centres of excellence and create those clusters that I know that you talk about in the document that you've released today. And other issues tactically, such as planning. Planning is tough, but it's important. So if you're involved in green energy, the planning criteria around your offshore wind farm or your hydrogen plant or whatever it may be, your battery factory, is complex. And so I'm here to help you. And what's good, and I signpost this, is levelling up. You may think, what does levelling up mean to me? Well, actually what it means is you've got cities, and this is what I've discovered in the last year or so, is the renaissance of the British regional capital. So Liverpool, Manchester, Sheffield, Birmingham, Bristol, Leeds, Belfast, these are all hungry for your capital, and as a result of which they're far more responsive than possibly many of the locations in the southeast in order to try and affect your investment. So remember them, because those things are working, and that's part of the government's work, to help tactically to try and drive the necessary outcomes that will help you invest. And then lastly, strategic. If there is such a thing in government, and I've discovered that there can be, and I don't know if you've had Andrew Griffiths come and talk to you, but he's my colleague who I work very closely with in financial services, and I think you touched on some of the points that we've been working on over the last few months in the earlier panel session, which is financial services reform, primarily to bring competitiveness into the mandate of the PRA and the FCA. And I think someone mentioned the concept of cultural change of regulators, which is very important. We want to look at improving regulation. And I want to do a project that looks at all the regulatory concepts in this country in order to maximise investment into the UK, which is very important. So giving the regulators the additional mandate direction to enable them to come to sensible conclusions and to support your business. And I was in financial services, as I said, for nearly 27 years, and I look at some of the regulatory occurrences that have enlightened my life during that period, and I think of MiFID II. And MiFID II, I don't know if anyone can, but if they can, they will receive a prize. Give me one useful benefit that MiFID II brought to financial services, this country, or humankind. Because I can't think of one, but yet all of it was well-intentioned. It was designed to increase transparency and to reduce costs to the consumer. And so when you think about that, you have to try to find sensible ways to help regulators come up with the right regulation, because of course those ambitions were very strong, but the outcomes were that we decimated the small cap investment market effectively, which has had disastrous effects on our economy, and we're still trying to work out what to do about them. And when I look at competition regulation as well, we were very much right in 1979 to simply focus on price and consumer choice. But now we have to look at investment as well. Because if you think of where do we see the stresses and strains, it's in grid infrastructure, it's in the infrastructure around our utilities and regulated entities, because the investment hasn't been put into them over the last 30 or so years. So if we're to survive as a nation, we need to structure ourselves, this country, and our regulatory apparatus to ensure that we are ripe for investment, we can survive, and we can prosper. I'm very keen to take some questions. I'm aware I may have run over time, but I want to thank you all again for the work that you do. You're supported by me, the department, and the government. We celebrate everything that you're doing, and we want to ensure that we remain the capital of international investment in the world. So thank you very much for inviting me, Miles, and I'm open for a few questions if I have time. Thank you.
Microphone's just coming over.
Minister, thank you very much for that excellent address to us all. I had a question on the suggestion that the government might direct investing entities in the UK, including pension funds, to invest in UK startups, or indeed in UK equities rather than others. And there's a piece on it in page 2 of today's Financial Times. I wondered where you stood on that suggestion. Thank you.
Well, it's not very important. It's not for the government to direct private capital in that sense. We live in a private sector economy where you do the directing. I think it is up to government to make sure the regulatory structure enables pension funds to invest in greenfield, non-coupon yielding assets to start with, which if any of you, like myself, have been on boards of pension funds, you can't do still. And the regulatory requirements for so many of our insurance companies and other funds to hold very high quantities of government debt strikes me as not necessarily the safest way, as we've discovered, to ensure the future. I think that there's a desire for a system which allows people to sleep at night. And my view is you shouldn't sleep at night. There should never be a system that makes you think you can. Because as soon as there is that system, it isn't actually true, because you never really can abrogate risk 100% if you want to generate some level of return. And we need to be aware of what risk is. And if you talk to some of my colleagues in the Treasury, the ministers, they talk about trying to reintroduce managed risk back into the system, without which we're not going to have a thriving financial services market. But that requires some cultural changes. It also requires some thoughtful approaches to regulation. And it does not require, by the way, throwing the baby out with the bathwater or some great bonfire of regulations. I know well from having run financial services businesses how a change in a regulation, even if it's marginally better, is as detractive to your efforts as it is if it stays the same. So we're very sensitive to that. But we do need to think about how to make sure that the structures we put in place don't limit the ability of people to effectively take managed risk. Please.
Thank you. Samantha Mobley from Baker McKenzie Law Firm. Thank you very much for your address. The question I have is whether the very broad remit of the new National Security and Investment Act, whether that has made your job more difficult.
Well, I was very pleased to read about that being covered in your paper this morning. And look, we've grown up. If you've been working in the city for a long time, one of the great things about it is it was completely open. But it was completely open, and no other country in the world, really in a major economy, had any structure that didn't give them some type of protection or discretion over how money moved in and out of their country and what happened to their specifically relevant national security assets. So in the last few years, we've rightly brought in protections, as you would agree. I don't think any of you haven't sat reading your Financial Times, as you do every morning, and raised eyebrows when you have seen some key businesses being bought in the way that they've been purchased and their technology transferred in the way it has been transferred. This is a relatively new concept for us, and it's essential that we make sure that we are protected and properly regulated. What I have done, and I've been very impressed by, is work very closely with officials and other ministers about how the NSIA and also the other legislation about reporting for financial lobbyists, which some of you may have also looked at. The strong intentions to make sure these are workable, fluid and frictionless is absolutely paramount. So when I go to meetings with the Chancellor, the Duchess of Lancaster or other key ministers, they are determined and they say to me, listen, we're bringing this in, but we want to make sure it doesn't affect investment, it doesn't create hurdles, it doesn't cause problems or chill the market. So the efforts to make sure that we're refining this are constant. I'm very keen to read your specific proposals about how we can do that better, and we're working to make sure that really it's in the background and these legislative measures are just used when necessary to ensure that we are protected in a sensible way, and I think we agree with that. Maybe one last question.
Just over here, get the microphone, please.
I'm not in the way of your lunch, am I? This is a disaster, because I'll be crushed by the stampede
Jason Groves from March. Was very good to sort of hear you outline what the government is doing, and you mentioned a lot of sectors, and I'll ask what is, I hope, a leading question. But one of the sectors here, of course, is the insurance sector. We're doing a lot to help companies around the world, not just British companies, but companies globally, address things like risk in Ukraine, the transition to net zero. I was wondering, as you go around the world, does the government see that opportunity to promote the insurance industry in London as helping some of the big risk issues? We've seen over the last, although there are a lot of opportunities, the share of take of the global insurance industry, London has stagnated over the last decade or so. So I'm just wondering if the government sees a role for it in helping to promote the insurance industry.
It definitely does, and thanks for the prompt. I know that Nick Lyons, the Lord Mayor, led a delegation heavily consisting of insurance businesses to Australia, Saudi Arabia and India quite recently. And my job is to go around and promote the sector, and so we can certainly do more of that. I mean, in terms of trying to get specific relationships, one of the things I think is important to remember, and what we're doing is we're creating this incredible global web of geostrategic trading relationships. Okay, yesterday I gave a statement in the House of Lords about the CPTPP prizes for all of those of you who can list all 11 countries. I say we've gone from Oceans 11 to Oceans 12. And it wasn't very funny then, by the way. It didn't go down very well. And now I have to dump that joke. But the point is, these are very important. So they contain, what do they contain? A lot of focus is on agricultural issues, which is, of course, very relevant and very sensitive, or goods and services, because we sort of think treaties are about, selling, widgets to Malaysia. The reality is that's very important, but the core growth area is services. And our strengths are in legal services, financial services, and insurance services, and so on. So that the work we do to create these digital services agreements are going to make a huge difference to yourself. And one of the most relevant things I think we've done recently, and maybe you could comment on this, is in relation to the United States. Now, we want to do a deal with the United States. We want to do a deal with nearly every country in the world, frankly, if we can, if they're appropriate to trade with us in that way. But they're not in a position to negotiate a complex trade deal at the moment. So we've gone state by state. And it would certainly be worth you all looking at what we're doing state by state, because fundamentally they are professional services, professional qualifications recognition treaties, they're professional services treaties, they're trying to lower barriers to entry to digital trade. And they're very important. That's where we're going to make our money for the people in this room. So the hardest thing that we have is we do a lot of this work and then no one knows about it. So please, come to us to find out what we're doing that will help facilitate your businesses do work overseas. And in terms of what I can do to promote you, I'm always available to you to talk to your end clients. And if you have ideas of places you want me to go or people you want me to talk to, I'm totally available to you to do that work as your ambassador. So thank you very much indeed. I'll let you enjoy the rest of your day, and success to you all, and grow your profits and businesses over the next few years. Thank you, Miles.
That was absolutely fantastic, Minister. Thank you very much for your time and for taking the questions and the very generous answers that you gave.